Hi everyone, and welcome to Ask the Experts, something you decided to try out following its success at ESPC 18 in Copenhagen last year. So we decided to bring the event online. Today we're delighted to be joined by two experts, Martin Eccles and João Ferreira, who will be answering your questions on Microsoft Teams. Type any question you may have for Martin or João in the questions window, and we'll try our best to get through as many as possible within the next 30 minutes. Thank you to those who have already submitted their questions. You can see those linked just below the video there. As you can see, we have a lot to get through today already, so let's jump right in. Maybe before we pick our first question, Martin and João, you would like to tell us a bit about yourselves?
Absolutely. Shall I go first? Maarten Eccles, I'm from the Netherlands. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Office Services and Apps and a Microsoft Regional Director. And I work for a company called Portiva, where I'm the CTO and responsible for everything technology related when it comes to Microsoft Cloud.
So my name is João Ferreira. I'm a SharePoint team lead at Fine-Tuning and also an MVP on Office development. And I'm also the owner of two Microsoft technology blogs, one for SharePoint and another one for Microsoft Teams.
Brilliant. So would you like to kick off with your first question?
All right, I can start this. One of the most popular questions that we are having, it's about running multiple instances of Microsoft Teams. I will just read one of the questions. Will it be possible to open multiple Teams windows so that I'm not constantly navigating between different Teams, channels, and conversations? So with the app itself, it's not possible, but there are alternatives that you can use. Obviously, you can have multiple instances of Microsoft Teams with multiple organizations running through the browser directly, or you can, with Nativifier, create kind of a desktop emulated version of Teams on your computer, and this way you can run multiple instances of Microsoft Teams. There are downsides when using this approach. Obviously, it will not provide the same native experience. You will lose some of the functionalities that only work on the app, and you will also lose the notifications. But other than that, you will be able to chat and to have multiple instances of Microsoft Teams up and running on your computer. And this works for Windows and for macOS.
Cool, great. Okay, so next question. One question that we've seen a lot is a question, when do we use Microsoft Teams and when do we use SharePoint? I've seen a couple of questions in this regard. Scenarios, where would you recommend which one? And there is also a question about content types and metadata that don't work in Teams. I guess these are all related. So right now, if you want to structure your data with labels, with metadata, with content types, etc., then you still have to go to SharePoint because it's not yet supported in Microsoft Teams. It is coming to Microsoft Teams because Microsoft has announced already quite a while ago at Ignite that the full document library fidelity from Microsoft SharePoint will come to Teams as well in the Files tab, but it's not there yet. It is coming soon, but until that time, you don't have metadata for files in Microsoft Teams. So I guess that's one of the big reasons why you still want to use the SharePoint perspective when it comes to files. Another reason why you want to use Teams instead of SharePoint is when you really want to have that conversation environment. When that's the focus of your collaboration, then you should move to Teams. That's when you have a look at Teams. But then again, you can't have the metadata for the files in your Files tab. So it really depends on the scenario. If you're really files focused, I guess that's where SharePoint is still the better one, the better choice. if you're really conversation focused, or if you want to bring in other tabs with content from other systems, because Teams is also really good in bringing in signals from other systems. If you want to consume that, then Teams is absolutely the better platform to choose.
All right, so another popular question, we've received it in a variety of different ways, but it's related with private channels and how to define individual access to the channels. This is one of the most requested features on the user voice, with more than 20,000 requests. It's coming soon, and you will be able to create private channels, that's for sure. There's no ETA, but it's definitely coming soon to Microsoft Teams.
Yes, one of the most requested features, absolutely. Not just on user voice, my customers ask for it too. Okay, so a question we received earlier was, how do you solve the user company join, leave, and change process, since there's no security group that you can nest within Office 365 groups, and dynamic groups are not an option? Well, dynamic groups are an option nowadays, but you need Azure Active Directory Premium for that. Then you could create dynamic groups that you can then leverage for Microsoft Teams, so that is possible. You can create company-wide channels or teams already. So then you just create a team, and you, instead of choosing public or private, you can choose a company-wide team, and that means that everyone within your organization automatically is a member of a team. But beside that, there are no really onboarding or offboarding options. The dynamic groups really works well, so that is definitely something you could look into. But again, you need Azure Active Directory Premium to leverage that. And what you can also do is you can now have teams that you can access with an access code. So you could create a SharePoint page or an onboarding page. That's something that we've done for customers, where every new employee, they have to visit their onboarding portal, where they can find anything else for the company as well when they just started there. But you can also create a page there with join codes for Microsoft Teams. You can now join a team with an access code. So you could create one page where you type in all the codes of all the teams that everyone should join when they just join the company, and type in the codes there, and that's the way that you can that people can join the teams, if that's a possibility for you, if you have an onboarding page, something like that. But in any other case, I would have a look at the dynamic groups.
All right, another question that we've received before, it's related with the calendar web part. So the question is, we've added a calendar web part to a page, and it's not working in the browser, but it works in the app. Yes, that's right. It's a limitation of the calendar functionality inside Microsoft Teams. It will only render the calendar if you open it in the native app. As an alternative, and this will not work for every single scenario, if you want to get the calendar visible in the browser, you will have to make a public view of the calendar and make it globally available. And if you do that, you will be able to get the calendar visible even inside of the browser.
Okay, so another question that popped up is, how do you bring structure to Teams? Yeah, that's an interesting one, because we hear that from our customers as well. Hey, now we have another tool with a lot of information, with a lot of things popping up, and how can I keep track of that? Well, there is some things that you can do about that. For example, and I am just opening up, I'll show my screen. So I've written a blog about that. It's a little bit pretentious label with a unified approach to personal happiness in Microsoft Teams. But below here, there is a Word document that everyone can use. So here's the link to a Word document. And what I've done here is written a couple of examples on how you can make sure that you that people start to like teams, that there's no information overload, and how you can bring structure to teams. And the main one, the main rule is, if you expect a response from someone, you should mention that person. That's, I think, the most important thing for Microsoft Teams. You have your activity stream here. You have your activity stream. If I go to Teams, then here you will see all your mentioned replies and other notifications. And this should be your starting point. So if someone writes a message somewhere on Microsoft Teams, and you can't expect everyone in your organization to have read that particular conversation if you didn't mention someone. And that mention can be a single person, that can be a channel, that can be an entire team, but only when you mention someone, you can expect someone to have actually read that conversation. And if you have agreed on that within your organization, then it's fine if you haven't read certain conversations, because you can always refer back to that rule, right? You can always say, no, but you didn't mention me. So that kind of is how you can bring some structure. The most important one to bring structure to Microsoft Teams is by mentioning people. If you don't get mentioned, it's up to you if you read a conversation or not. You can follow certain channels if you really want to make sure that conversations pop up in your activity stream. And another important one, which really helps, is give a title to a conversation. Let me go back to Teams, if my Teams is loading. So here I have, I'm not sure why not everything is loading. Okay, here we go. So here I am in a team, and I can start a conversation, and I can just type in, let me zoom in a little bit so everyone can see it on the screen. I can start typing here, but when I do this, a conversation starts below, but it doesn't give me a lot of information, and I have to scan the entire conversation thread in order to have a look at what this is about. So make sure you teach yourself and people around you, your coworkers, to click this little A here, and now you can add a subject. And that's really important, because now I can say this is about topic A. And when I start this message, now I can have a look at the title, and I can scroll. If I choose another channel here, you can see there are not a lot of titles used here. And now I have to dive into these topics to see if they are interesting to me or not. And when each of these topics have a title, I can very quickly scan if a certain conversation is easy for me, is good for me, is something I should read or not. So titles and mentioning, that's the two key features, I guess, that really could help you in bringing structure to Microsoft Teams.
Okay, picking a question that we just received a few minutes ago. And the question is there a trigger available for teams created? We need that to add an extra tab to all teams created. And we've received some questions about it before we started the live event as well. There's not a trigger, but what you can do in reality is use Microsoft Graph to create your teams. And once the team is created, you will be able to do the creation of the tabs. You will be able to install apps directly in the team. And that way you will be able to automate the creation of your teams. Soon will be also released with the PNP provisioning the support for Microsoft Teams, and that might be also a good option to create new teams with a predefined structure that will help you to create teams based on templates. But at the moment we are speaking, my suggestion is really to use Microsoft Graph to do that. And with Graph, you can use C#, you can use PowerShell, wherever you are comfortable with, and you will be able to get everything automated through it.
Yeah, you can nowadays even create messages. So if you create a team and you use Microsoft Graph, you can add a welcoming message or something already in a channel. So that's really nice. Yeah, I agree. Okay, one other question that we received is about migration, and in particular, migrate files to Teams, SharePoint migration tool. And the question is that if I migrate stuff with the SharePoint migration tool, that everything ends up in the root of the document library, where Teams use subfolders, as we all know, right? When you create a channel in Microsoft Teams, it will create a subfolder in your document library, and that's where you want the files to end up. And the SharePoint migration tool, they end up in the root folder. Unfortunately, there's not much that you can do about that. Or you could have a look at third-party tooling. There's several out there from Metalogic, FPoint, ShareGate that actually can migrate certain files to certain folders. Most of them use kind of an Excel list where you can say, okay, these files need to end up in this folder, and then the tool reads the Excel file and just brings all the files to the right folders. So that's something that you could use for that.
All right. Another question that we've received before, and the question is, when joining Microsoft meetings using Teams, the chat is not working. Most of the time, it tells me you can't join, you can't post a message here because you're not a member of this chat. So in order to get chats working, you have to make sure that your meeting policies allow it. So in the Teams Admin Center, if you go to meetings and then meeting policies, and then if you open the org-wide policy, you will have to scroll down all the way to the bottom of the page and make sure that allow chat in meetings is enabled. If this is not turned on, you will not be able to chat in meetings.
Okay, I see that we've received a couple of other questions from multiple people. That how soon is soon for the private channels? We can't say anything about that. We know that Microsoft is working on it. They know, all I can say is they realize that this is the top one feature that is being asked on user voice. We showed that before. They know it's the top one number feature, the top one requested feature. They're working on it. They ran into performance issues and some architectural issues, and when they release it, they want to release it well, and they are working on it, and it is coming soon, but I can't say how soon, or I can't name a specific date. Also because I don't know the specific date. So it's not, even if I knew, I couldn't share it, but we don't know the date either. Yeah. All we know is that Microsoft is working really hard on it, and they do realize that this is something they need to release soon.
That's right. Another question that we have is, when working in Teams, we would like to work with tasks. Planner is good, but we need more functionality for small projects, tasks, subtasks with different persons and milestones. Tasks in SP SharePoint is quite old-fashioned. Any good advice on how use Teams for small projects with more functionality than the Planner give today? So again, here you will have to rely on third-party apps that are already available on Microsoft Teams Store. One of those apps is Trello. You might find a few other alternatives, but if you want to get more functionality from what Microsoft provides, third-party apps is really the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, there was another question related to this, which we received today, is how good or relevant or appropriate in Teams is Teams for project management, and I guess that has to do with this as well. So if you think that Planner suits you well for your projects, then Teams is perfect for it. right? And there's a lot of companies that have a Kanban kind of style of project approach, and then Planner could really work for you. And in that case, you could use teams, because for every project you could create a new team. You bring in the project members. They can share their tasks through Planner. You can share all the documents. You have conversations around the different topics within your project. So we use it. For example, our company uses Teams for all the projects, and for every project that we run, we create a new team. And the cool thing about that is that you can invite external people as well. So you can bring in guests. So we create a team with our project team, but you always have members from the organization that you're doing the project for, or maybe you're working together with partners or suppliers or anything. You can bring in those people to Microsoft Teams. So I would say that Teams is a really good tool, a really good platform to have proper collaboration, and that's what projects is all about. If you want to leverage project management and you want to go further than what Planner offers you, yeah, then so what Joao said, then you should look at the tooling for now. But from a collaboration perspective, I'd say that Teams is the perfect tool for projects, and especially because you can create a new team for every project. You could create a page somewhere on SharePoint showing you the relevant teams through the Graph API. Again, you could create a web part which shows you all the teams that you're a member of or something similar. So that really works well.
Okay, so another question that we received multiple times is, how do I add someone outside of my organization? And that's, again, needs to be enabled. It's disabled by default. You need to go to the Teams admin center. You need to go to the org-wide settings and then click on guest access and turn on this feature. And once you turn this on, you will be able to add people from outside of your organization to your Microsoft Teams. And then you can decide what features are available to the guests. And you can turn on and turn off those features in the admin center. Once you turn this on, you might not see the feature working right away. It might have a slight delay, but this is the way to turn on guest access on Microsoft Teams.
Okay, I saw someone post a message, a question about when a user adds to team via a code, he's not able to see the wiki in the SP docs. I see that question a couple of times in there. I'm not sure if it's the same person, I think so. But after only a couple of hours, he or she is able to see the docs and the wiki in the team. The reason is that the documents and the wiki are stored in the SharePoint site underneath. And when you add yourself to a team through a code, then there has to some mechanism has to kick off. It shouldn't take 2 hours, by the way. 2 hours is pretty long. In my experience, it's usually within 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes, that everything pops up. Unfortunately, the SLA that Microsoft has is 24 hours. So Microsoft has 24 hours before, when you create a team or when someone joins a team, when everything is populated in the backend and you can see everything. And also, when you create a new team, then an Office 365 group is created, the corresponding Exchange mailbox is created, and the SharePoint site is created, everything. And normally it only takes sometimes up to 15 minutes. But like I said, Microsoft says in its documentation that they are allowed to take up to 24 hours before everything is in place.
Okay, so another question that we got multiple times is related with the onboarding of other members of the organization and how they can promote the use of Microsoft Teams when they are not using it yet. There's a lot of good documentation explaining what Teams can be used for. There's a lot of good blogs out there about Teams. And Microsoft Teams also has a YouTube channel that you can use to send to your colleagues, to send to your board, to convince them and to show them what you can do with Teams. These videos here are really good explaining the functionalities of Teams, and then there's also tips and tricks on how to use Teams. So besides all the good documentation that Microsoft is producing, there's also the video option on YouTube, also from Microsoft.
All right, so the question that just popped up, is there a limitation for the amount of external users in a tenant or in Teams? There is a technical limit and there's a licensing limit. So it depends on from what perspective you're looking at it. There is not a limit for external users in a certain team. There is a technical limit. I think they just increased it. So I thought it was either 50,000 or 75,000 users. It's a lot anyway, but it's well documented on the Microsoft documentation site. But there's also a limitation from a licensing perspective, and that is Microsoft says that you are allowed to invite 5 external users for every licensed user that you have in your tenant. So that's from a licensing perspective, the maximum number of external users you can invite in your tenant. So if you have a company with 100 users, 100 licensed users, you can invite up to 500 external users in your tenants.
Okay, another question we have here, is there any plan to release a compact version of Teams just for instant messaging and calls? I'm not aware of that. I don't know if you know something about it, Martin, but I don't think this will happen. Teams, it's much more than Skype for Business. And if we reduce it just to instant messaging and calls, we are talking about Skype anyway, and it's not Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, you can disable the calling, for example. That's something you can do, but you cannot disable the file sharing, for example. Yep. So it will always have the file sharing capability through SharePoint. Yeah. Let me see if another question popped up. Oh, how do I add someone outside my organization? That's also an interesting one. We talked a little bit about guest users, but how can I enable this? There is a setting in the admin center, and let me see. No, I don't have the admin open, so I won't share my screen now. It will take too much time. But there is a setting in the admin center where you can enable external guest access in your teams. You have to be careful though, because by default, when you create a team, then for this particular team, external guest access is enabled already. It's just disabled by default on the tenant level. So when you enable it on the tenant level, you will enable it for all the teams that you have already created. So if you don't want this, you need to disable it on your teams, on the teams that you created before you enable the setting on the tenant level. Joao, I think I saw you share the admin center.
I can share the setting.
Yeah, so maybe you can show it on your screen. But keep in mind that it is then enabled for all the there you go, the guest access in Teams setting. Mind that if you flip this switch, it's enabled for all the teams that you already have created, right? So by default, it is on a team. So if you have HR teams or teams with specific documentation, you really don't want people to invite external users, not even by accident, you should disable that on a team level, which you can, but you need PowerShell to do that properly.
Okay, so another question. that was just asked. Is there a way to edit the default view in the Files tab? It could be very useful, for example, have a chance to modify the default files order. I'm not aware if it's possible to do with Graph or with Teams PowerShell. Through the UI, you cannot change the
It's
Files
not
tab.
possible with the other one either. No.
Okay.
It's coming when the full files fidelity is coming to the Files tab, though. Yeah, because then if the SharePoint document library view is coming to Teams, and that is coming, then you can set a default view and you can select which columns to show and everything. So that is coming, but it's not there right now.
Yeah. There's already a few third-party solutions to display libraries with custom views available. So again, if you want to have it right away, you have to rely on third-party offers.
Yeah. I saw a couple of questions pop up about wikis, and the majority of the questions is about, hey, they don't really work well, or hey, is there anything going to be improved? I agree that they don't really work well. I know that Microsoft realizes that as well, and I have heard that they are looking into it, but that's about all I know. So I too hope that there will be something better when it comes to wikis. You could always use OneNote, for example. That's not really a replacement for wikis, but at least it works a little bit more intuitive than the wiki functionality of Teams does. But that's unfortunately all I can say about it.
Okay, so another question, and I think we've got several about this. When recording a meeting, does it get stored locally and uploaded to stream? I lost a recording. It may be because the internet connection was lost. Thanks. So when you record a meeting, it is indeed uploaded to stream, and it becomes available a few minutes after you finish the recording. If you lost it, probably something went wrong with the recording because it's not stored on your computer. It's handled through the Microsoft Teams ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. That's for Skype. It used to be that when you do a Skype recording, it's stored on your local machine, and then you have to do whatever you want with that MP4 file that's being created. But for Microsoft Teams, what happens is when you start a recording in the backend, so this is a little bit technical, in the backend, a bot user is being added to your meeting. You can see that if you have a look at the meeting properties, you will see that there's a user in there that you don't really recognize. It's a bot user, and that user records the file, the meeting, and the file is being stored in an Azure Blob Storage, temporary, for a minimum of 24 hours. And in that Azure Blob Storage, it's being transcoded and everything, different formats and different bit rates are being created for that particular recording, and then it's being pushed into Microsoft Stream. So that's how it technically works. Bot user does the recording in the cloud, stores the recording, the MP4 file, in an Azure Blob Storage where it's being converted, transcoded, as I should say, and then it's being put into Microsoft Stream. So if it gets lost, it's not because you lost your internet connection. That's not possible. So something else is going on. So maybe you should ask submit a support ticket to Microsoft.
All right, another question is who wins, guest access setting in Teams or SharePoint? So still about guest access. It's two separate settings. So guest access on Teams will give you access to Teams. If you have it disabled on Teams, but if you enable the guest access on the site collection that it's generated for that specific team, the user will be able to access to the site collection, but will not be able to access on Teams. So if you want to give them access to both, you will have to enable guest access on both.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions that have been asked over the past couple of days about development for Microsoft Teams. How can I implement a continuous integration, continuous deployment for SharePoint framework apps? How can I choose the best architecture for SharePoint framework apps? How can I package them? It's all very new, right? Since the last version of the SharePoint framework, we can now create SharePoint framework apps for Microsoft Teams. There's not a lot of documentation about it yet, but a couple of our MVP friends, Rick van Roosselt, Tommy Gullis, and a couple more. I'm sorry if I forget your names, guys. They are creating a blog series and YouTube series about Microsoft Teams development. So I really encourage you to, I think Rick van Roosselt has tweeted about it the most the last couple of days. I've seen most tweets from him and his post on LinkedIn. They have started a blog series about Teams development, and I'm sure that the topics that I just mentioned will be covered in his series as well, because it's a whole topic on itself, and it will take us at least half an hour more to talk about that, if not longer.
Yeah. Just to add to this development topic, so if you are already developing using SharePoint framework to SharePoint, if you upgrade your projects to version 1.8 or to version 1.8.2 that just got released, you will be able to easily get your SharePoint solutions into Teams. You just need then to add a setting in the manifest that will tell if the web part runs on Teams and SharePoint, or just on Teams, or just on SharePoint. The installation will be always done through the SharePoint app catalog. And then on Teams, to install it on Teams, you will have either a button on the tenant app catalog that will deploy the app to the Teams, or if that button for some reason is not working for you, you can always create a zip file containing the manifest and two logos that will identify the app on Teams and deploy it manually to your solution. So it's really easy nowadays. If you are already a SharePoint developer, it's really easy to develop something for Microsoft Teams, because in reality, it's SharePoint underneath it, and it will be exactly the same thing.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. I think we're kind of running over time, so maybe we'll do one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, so the question that just popped up, and I think I've seen it before: how can we prevent the creation of documents if labels are required in the Files tab? That's a very short answer. Unfortunately, we cannot. So if you require labels, yeah, from a Teams perspective, people can still upload files, create files, because it would take away the collaboration perspective of Teams if you could not upload a file there or work together on a file. So unfortunately, there's no way to do that.
Perfect. João and Martin, thank you so much. This has been a really great session. We've got through so many questions. You've done a power of work there. We really appreciate you taking the time out today. Apologies to anyone if we haven't got around to answering your questions, but don't worry, we'll try and get those answers for you maybe in a blog post in the next couple of days. We really hope you found this helpful. Thanks again to João and Martin, and thanks to everyone for tuning in today. And have a great day, and we hope to see you back again soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.